Problems in the South. So it really does seem like the South is moving forward. But in reality, it's a lot more complicated. In fact, the South was barely keeping pace with the North during this time period. When you look at, like, for instance, the share of manufacturing of the United States in the South, it increased only from 10.3% to 10.5% during this time period. And in fact, their share of the nation's capital declined slightly. You have a lot more people working in manufacturing, but because there's a boom in population, the actual percentage working in manufacturing stays about the same. In fact, the per capita income of the South declined during this time and actually only managed to recover by about 1920. So we're seeing in the South very much a weak agricultural economy. Yes, you still have a high rural birth rate, and you're also going to see a huge depress in wages. That's the thing. Low wages really undermined the Southern economy. This is going to get into the concept of purchasing power, which is really, really important come the Great Depression. So this is kind of a good little initial view, teaching moment really, on economics. So the thing is, when people are paid well, they tend to spend more money, and therefore consumer demand is higher, and therefore factories and manufacturers can make more of a product and pay people better because people are buying it. This is called purchasing power. Basically, the idea is if you pay 100 people more money than paying like one person a lot of money, that one person cannot spend as much as 100 people, because think like today, 100 people buying iPhones, that's going to be a lot more money than one person going out and buying the fanciest phone. So the thing is, here with low wages, you have people who are being poorly paid in the South, and they don't buy much. Because they don't buy much, consumer demand stays low, and it limits the market for manufactured goods. So that means they don't necessarily can't afford to pay their people more money. And if they don't pay their people more money, then those people continue not to spend as much. And you can see how this becomes cyclical. The other issue with low wages is there's not much tax revenue from it. And this is going to restrict the state's ability to fund different services, such as public education. Low wages also mean that if you were educated in the South, you might recognize the low wages there and just move to the North. And so that keeps a lot of those educated people out of the South and out of developing things that might have, increased revenue in the South. The same issue with immigrants. It keeps immigrants and their skills and their energy out of the South, because why would they come to the South when they can stay in the North and get paid better? In fact, I should mention, between 1860 and 1900, we actually have this huge wave of immigration in the United States, but even with that huge wave of immigration, the foreign population in the South actually declined. We're also going to see the issue with limited capital. The thing is, the Civil War basically had wiped out the South's capital resources. And so in a way, during this time period, in the Reconstruction time period, the South was almost like an economic colony of the North. If you've taken 1301, you can kind of compare it to like the English colonies versus Great Britain, so to speak. What this really means, though, is that a lot of northern goods go into the South, so the South is buying northern goods, but they're not bringing in people, they're not bringing in technology, they're not bringing in capital, which would help boost the economy of the South. There's really just no money to fund expansion. Investment in the South is a lot more riskier, and it's a lot less promising than investment in the North. So if you were a bank, why invest in the South when you could invest in the North? Northern banks who did invest in the South tended to give shorter terms of loans and higher interest rates to those in the South because it's more likely they might fail. Now you might be going, wait a second. We looked at all those industries. Well, let's break it down. The textile industry. It really depended on thousands of small investors from different towns and cities. They avoided any risk, any innovation. So really, the textile industry was a lot of small scale enterprises, not one large scale. One industry I didn't mention before is things like the lumber industry is going to boom in the South during this time. But you can see that there's very much little concern for the natural environment. And the thing is, the lumber industry really required little capital and it required unskilled labor. And so what they would do is they would go into an area, they would hire the people on site, they would process the raw materials literally there, and then they just basically leave behind a bare landscape and sometimes even leave behind rusting machinery, that it was more expensive to move it than just to leave it there. And the workforce that had worked for the lumber industry is basically no better off than they had been before. Yeah, they got paid well for a couple of months, and that's it. And then, of course, they have to deal with all the environmental damage of, later generations are going to pay with record floods, uncultivatable land, toxic water supplies. Think about those machinery left to rust and everything there. But let's look at some other industries we did. The tobacco industry, they avoided some of the problems. You're basically going to have James B. Duke's American Tobacco Company. He's basically going to have a monopoly. And so he is so profitable in his company, he becomes his own bank, installing the latest technology in the plants and buying out his competitors and diversifying actually into electric power. But really, for all the industries except for tobacco, made in the South becomes synonymous with, oh, that is the bottom of the line goods. The other issue is if you have low wages, a lot of times you can, so to speak, today, threaten to leave your job and go to a different job that will pay you better. The problem is a lot of these mills were really isolated and basically there was no other employment alternatives. So it was better to get something than to get nothing. And so really when we look at this, tobacco and that industry is growing, but even that is going to be really small compared to a lot of northern industrial cities. We're also seeing a lot of people moving into cities. Even with the limited amount of industry in the South, it still has a huge impact on the people there. A lot of failed farmers and their entire families would have to uproot themselves from rural areas and secure employment in mills. The thing is 1880, when you're looking at the towns in the South versus the rural countryside, they really don't differ that much. But by the time you get to 1900, there's an enormous difference. The thing is, towns were a lot more connected to other parts of the country, and therefore they're going to be a lot more influenced by other perceptions and items than the countryside is. And so we're going to see that a lot of the urban South is going to be the regions that draw in the South's talent and ambitious young people who might be excited by the new technology. But at the same time, a lot of Southerners who were from the countryside and the rural areas were repelled by these towns, who felt like they were just emphasizing great wealth. And they saw this as a cultural domination of the North all over again. And they felt like all these Northern values are going to, undermine Southern values of grace, charm, faith, family. You get ministers in churches warning people against urbanization and the temptation of urbanization. You're going to definitely see an age gap here, whereas children and young people are more likely to be drawn to these urban regions in the South and, excited to go to the vibrant shops or maybe have a Coca-Cola. A lot of the parents of these people are more apprehensive. They don't like that when you go into the urban regions, there's more of a blurring of class lines and racial lines. And they might be offended by city dwellers who treat them with disgust on some level because they aren't as open to the new and other perceptions of the world. I also have to mention cotton. You can't talk about the South around the 1800s without talking about cotton. The thing is, cotton before and after the Civil War is still going to dominate the Southern agricultural experience. Though I should mention, actually, if you grew something like tobacco or rice, you tended to fare better, but there you go. We are going to see, though, during this point, an oversaturation of cotton on the market. And with an oversaturation of cotton on the market, the price of cotton is going to start falling. And as the price of cotton falls, people grow more cotton to try to make up for this. But then as more is grown and put on the market, prices continue to fall. This is the rules of supply and demand. You might be going, hey, I took you for 1301. I recognize that was what happened with tobacco back in Jamestown. Good job if you made that connection. If not, don't worry about tobacco and Jamestown and everything like that. We're talking about cotton. The thing is, this seems like a simple fix. Grow less cotton. The problem is this wasn't really possible because cotton was basically the only commodity in the South that was instantly convertible into cash. And basically it was accepted literally as credit for buying items. Even if you decide to grow something else like food, you actually would make less money than cotton. And thus we see the issue continuing, that prices plummet in cotton, people have to grow more to make up the difference, but people continue to do this anyway. Now, one of the reasons for this is cotton was really just not a picky plant. The thing is, if you've ever tried to grow something, especially here in Texas, you'll note there are a lot of plants that are very picky about their climate, their soil type, their rainfall, parasites. Cotton wasn't picky, so basically anyone could grow it anywhere in the South. So, looking at everything from this video, I ask you, how is any of this similar to today?